almost it. Got one more week, one more Sunday after this one. Tomorrow, the sale of our house closes, and we'll be renting in a home that belonged to us, but now belongs to someone else. And it's all kind of surreal, a little sad. It all feels a little bit like kind of death. And the same is true for this church, for my relationship here. You know, my wife and I took possession of this little house over on the east side of Petaluma 13 years ago, and we thought of it as ours. And made some improvements. But now it's really clear that it's just a space we were occupying. And that the land, the earth, doesn't belong to anyone. Passing it on to the next inhabitant. And St. John's came here 13 and a half years ago. Some of you were here then, some of you have come since. Together we've done some good work. I feel like I can leave and it's going to keep going. And next Sunday, the 23rd rector of St. John's Episcopal Church in Petaluma will ride off into the sunset, and you'll have the opportunity to remember that this was never my church. Just as it's not any of yours. And that's kind of the advantage of worshiping in a community that goes back over 160 years. It helps you remember that. You're just the latest to pass through. Your job is to do the best you can with it, to make it live through you, and then to pass it on to whoever comes next. This is a way of life that is acquainted with death, and that recognizes that any life really worthy of the name is like that. Last weekend, we went, Meg and I, with a couple of our dearest friends, Risa's godparents, a couple that we met when I was in seminary in Berkeley. And they still live there. My daughter Risa babysat their two little boys, well, not so little anymore, whom she refers to as her god brothers. And the four of us went off to our favorite hot spring up in Mendocino County, had a beautiful time together, relaxing, hiking in the ancient redwoods, and talking about marriage and parenting, dealing with our own aging parents. And I realized that what makes this relationship so special is that it has always been changing. And that we can have conversations with each other now that we could not have had at any previous time in our relationship. And it's just going to keep changing. And there's something about that, something that I felt when we said goodbye to them by our front door yesterday afternoon, knowing it would probably be a while before we saw them again, and they would no longer be 45 minutes away. Something about that that's very sad, and yet also incredibly sweet. And it's those moments of our lives that are most vivid, when we feel most alive, that are also shot through with the awareness of just how precious, unique, and irreplaceable this moment is. That it will never come again. And that is part of what makes it so meaningful and so beautiful. And Jesus wants to talk about this kind of life. This kind of life that doesn't grasp onto anything, that is partial or fixed, but it's always open, always free, always able to receive what life has to give because it is a gift. A gift that just kind of pours through us and flows on. And the world, as it's been revealed to us in the great spiritual traditions of humankind, and now even is revealed to us by modern science after a brief, strange detour into believing that somehow the world was made up of a whole lot of little pieces. We now know that every little piece of the universe is connected throughout all time, from the very beginning to the very end, to every other piece. And to try to take one part out and separate it from the rest and invest it with some kind of permanent and fixed nature is simply to deceive ourselves. And yet we can live as if ourselves are like that. As if the purpose of life is to build up myself. As if I were some real thing, permanent and isolated from every other thing. And to just keep adding more and more and more to myself. More possessions, more power, more status, more experiences, more influence over other people. Rather than to know that I have meaning and purpose and beauty and depth and richness to my life because I am part of something so much greater than myself. So if all of this were just a philosophical insight that we might privately enjoy, or a mystical realization that we could have in some moment of meditation or something. That would be pretty good. But what makes us, well, to quote the Gospel of Mark, what makes us ashamed of Jesus is that he keeps showing up and reminding us that this greater part, this greater whole of which we are a part, is not just magnificently vast or, infinitely complex and diversified, but it also has a purpose. It's actually going somewhere. It's a story. And this is the great insight of the Jewish people, of the religion of what we sometimes kind of dismissively call the Old Testament, is that it's all going somewhere, and that the one who is guiding it there is actually calling us not simply to know this for ourselves, but is calling us into communion and community with that purpose. That greater purpose for which and toward which everything that arises and passes away is given. Calls us into community with it, or him, or her, or whatever you want to call it. God, the Spirit. And calls us to create with our fellow human beings on the earth a community who manifests that great purpose for which the entire universe was made. You and me, with our, cell phones that go off in the middle of the sermon. And all the other things that make us fallible and human, all of our fears and our jealousies and our misgivings and our little petty rivalries and annoyances and hindrances and addictions and, nasty little habits. And in fact, our empires, our societies, our civilizations that we organize around not the principle of life that keeps flowing and growing and evolving and can only evolve because every unique, instantiated bit of existence in it is going to die and make room for the next form to arise. No, we organize ourselves according to this principle that there is something called myself. Or maybe some other self called Caesar or the President of the United States or whatever. some ideology or, nation or some idea of something that is fixed and enduring and more important than life itself, to which it is entirely appropriate to subjugate human beings and sacrifice them in one form or another. Because of the greatness of this, whatever it is that we have created and separated out from everything else and decided to treat as if it were of ultimate value. We live in communities organized around those things. Money, flags of one kind or another. Instead of being organized around life, a precious gift of life that we share with every other thing in the universe, that we can receive, and we can give, and there's plenty of it to go around because it's just like everywhere, and it's never going to end. And so, Jesus is kind of an embarrassment. He's an affront. He's like a problem. The problem for the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees, because their form of, worshiping God is basically self-serving. And he goes to Jerusalem to show them that. And predictably, they silence him the way that empires silence people. In that particular day and age, the most effective means they had for silencing people who pointed out the inconvenient and embarrassing truth that all of their great, glorious, achievements were just another passing thing, was by nailing people to crosses outside the gates of the city. And that, my friends, is what Jesus says we have to look forward to. Something like that. Might look different for us, but we do have this responsibility to do something. Do something not just for ourselves, but for this greater community of life that God is calling us to become, along with our fellow human beings, by treating them like human beings of equal status as ourselves, particularly the ones that we find embarrassing, shameful, degrading to associate with. Those are the ones, the ones that everybody has agreed should be, punished. Those are the ones who remind us most powerfully that whatever this community is toward which we are all called, it includes them too. That's our job here at the church. To find a way to live that way with each other, but even more importantly, to somehow tell everybody else about this life that's really life, that you can't own, and it's not about you, and yet it's connected to everything, and it has a purpose. And nobody's left out. And every kind of organization and political party and army and economic system and every other kind of human endeavor based on the illusion that it is of ultimate value, more important than human beings, the world that God has created, has to die.
Please stand as you're